After being defeated in the Second World War, Japan was forced to give up all the territories under her occupation. One of those territories was Korea. The Soviet Union launched an invasion into Manchuria, forcing the Japanese out of Manchuria and Korea. Fearing all of Korea would fall to Soviet occupation, the United States then suggested a division of the Korean peninsula. Korea was then divided into two halves by the 38th parallel. The Soviet Union occupied the north, while the United States occupied the south. Though previously allies against a common enemy, the two powers now were rivals, competing with each other for dominance. In 1948, North and South Korea became independent states. North Korea became a communist state led by Kim Il-sung, and South Korea became an anti-communist state led by Ri Sing-man. These two states inherited from their superpower parents a hatred of the other side, and their leaders dreamed of uniting Korea under their rule. In South Korea, communists aided by Kim Il-sung's North Korea began an insurgency against the Ri government. As a result of the insurgency, South Korea was not really ready for a conventional war with North Korea. If war ever happened between the two, South Korea would have been overrun by North Korean troops. 25th June 1950. War breaks out on the Korean peninsula, and 3 days later, the South Korean capital, Seoul, is captured by North Korean troops. The unprepared South Korean army is defeated and by August pushed to the Busan perimeter. While retreating, the South Korean army and anti-communist militias massacre around 60,000 to 200,000 suspected communists. Despite capturing almost all of South Korea, North Korea is unable to achieve total victory and fails to capture the Busan perimeter. The US establishment supported an intervention in Korea, as they feared that after Korea, the rest of the Asian continent would fall to communism. This is called the domino theory, the same theory that guided the United States into intervening in Vietnam. So, US President Harry S. Truman was now inclined to intervene in support of South Korea. The United Nations Security Council, or UNSC, also condemned the invasion and supported military intervention in Korea. All of these resolutions were only passed because the Soviet Union, which could have vetoed these resolutions, was absent. The Soviet Union had been boycotting all UN meetings because the United Nations only recognized the US-aligned Republic of China as the legitimate government of China and not the Soviet-aligned People's Republic of China. Then, on the 15th of September, UN forces, mostly consisting of US troops and South Korean troops under the leadership of General Douglas MacArthur from the United States, landed in Incheon and then recaptured Seoul. By October, President Ri regained control over most of the South, as most of it was recaptured by South Korean and UN forces. After recapturing territory, South Koreans and UN forces crossed the 38th parallel into North Korea. On the 19th of October, the North Korean capital, Pyongyang, fell to them. Soon, the North Koreans were pushed to the Chinese border and were on the verge of collapse. It seemed like President Ri finally would get to reunite Korea under his rule. Then, China militarily intervened on North Korea's side, preventing Ri from winning the war and reuniting Korea. Chinese and North Korean troops started to regain territory, and by December, South Korean and UN forces were forced out of North Korea. In January 1951, Seoul again switched hands and fell to the Chinese and North Koreans, only for the South Koreans to recapture the city in March. The North Koreans and Chinese tried to capture Seoul again in April, but the attempt ended in failure. By July, the war came to a stalemate, which would last for another 2 years. While the Soviet Union didn't directly intervene in Korea, they did provide material and medical aid to the North. Material aid included arms, tanks, and fighter aircraft. Soviet pilots also fought in the war for the North Koreans in disguise. They wore Chinese or North Korean uniforms and flew Chinese or North Korean fighter aircraft. General Douglas MacArthur was mad at China for intervening in Korea and wanted to drop atomic weapons on Manchuria to prevent China from sending more troops in Korea. In his view, this would have secured American victory in Korea. President Truman rejected this suggestion from General MacArthur, and this, along with other reasons, led to President Truman to dismiss General Douglas MacArthur as the commander of the United Nations Command. By July 1951, it was clear the war was unwinnable. There were attempts to make peace during the war, which failed to materialize. But after 2 years of bloody stalemate, peace was finally on the horizon. In January 1953, a new president was sworn into office in the United States, whose name was Dwight D. Eisenhower. He was quite keen on bringing an end to this brutal war. Few months later, on the 27th of July 1953, the Korean Armistice Agreement was signed by the UN, North Korea, and China. South Korea refused to sign the armistice, as President Tree was unwilling to accept his failure to reunify Korea under his leadership. This armistice brought peace to the Korean peninsula and unofficially ended the war. A demilitarized zone was established that became the border between the two. Officially, though, both sides are technically still at war with each other. The Korean War was a significant event in world history. This war was a major development in the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States, as after Korea, both sides would fight each other through proxies all over the world. For Korea, though, the war was disastrous, as the total death toll of the war was up to 5 million. Half of them were civilians. And the economies of both the Koreas were destroyed. Along with that, the war also consolidated the division of the Korean nation and fostered hatred of the other on both sides, till today. It is to be mentioned that the current economic and geopolitical situation of East Asia was greatly influenced by the Korean War, even though this goes unnoticed by many. Besides the division of Korea, the rise of Japan as an economic juggernaut, and the failure of mainland China's attempts to reunite with/annex Taiwan are the results of the Korean War.